Earlier this week, we put out a list of 5 underrated defensive players that do not get talked about enough for how good they are, and today we're switching over to the offensive side of the ball. Keep in mind there are no quarterbacks on this list because that would be cheating, so these are just underrated offensive players that either don't get the national media recognition I think they should, either through Pro Bowl or All-Pro selections, or maybe they just get outright ignored when it comes to things like the NFL Top 100 or just general discourse about the top players at their positions. It's a big league, there's a lot of good players in it. Unfortunately, some of the best ones just don't get talked about, and so this video is going to rectify that. Without further ado, let's get to number 5 on our list. Trey McBride is one of the best young tight ends in the NFL, and unfortunately, I don't think he really gets recognized for that because of where he plays. And that's no shade to Arizona, it's just kind of acknowledging reality. The Cardinals don't have a ton of nationally televised games, so most fans, and even more crucially, most media, haven't really been paying attention. Among all tight ends last year, he was 6th in catches and 7th in yards. And keep in mind, he didn't even have Kyler Murray on the field until week 10, so he did a lot of his damage with backup quarterbacks. And yet, despite all that production, he didn't really get any Pro Bowl buzz. No disrespect to Jake Ferguson, by the way, but to me, McBride was a better player last year, and in my opinion, he deserved that NFC spot over him. McBride worked every inch of the field as a receiver, deep, intermediate, or underneath as a yak weapon in the screen game. They force-fed him the ball a lot because they kind of had to, and he definitely paid off those opportunities. And he was just dominant no matter where he was targeted or what alignment he was in. I also want to mention that he's a solid run blocker as well. A lot of top tight ends in the league are kind of one-dimensional. They're more big slot receivers than anything else, but Trey McBride is one of the few tight ends that you can line up anywhere and he's still going to be able to contribute, whether it's a run or a pass. The Cardinals had a really good run game last year overall. It was one of the few things they actually did well, and they were top 10 in the league in terms of rushing EPA per play. A big reason for that success is that they had Trey McBride blocking his ass off, especially when he's being used as a puller or as a blocker in space. He doesn't always win at the point of attack against bigger-bodied defensive linemen, which you kind of expect because he's a tight end, but he's still a hell of a lot better than most other top receiving tight ends in the blocking department. And he always gives a high effort on early down runs, so I'll give him marks for that, at least. Overall, this is a very versatile tight end and an extremely productive tight end who I firmly believe we still have not seen the best of yet. Now that he's got a healthy Kyler Murray, an improved offensive line right next to him, and of course Marvin Harrison Jr. pulling a lot of attention away from him, I think we're about to see a monster season for Trey McBride, and hopefully the national recognition that comes with that. Now, that brings us to number 4 on our list, switching gears from tight end to running back, and we're going to highlight one of the most explosive young backs in the league, who unfortunately happens to be in a situation where he doesn't get the coverage he deserves. Among all running backs in the NFL, Jaylen Warren had the highest missed tackles forced per attempt in the league at 0.35, which I know doesn't sound like a big number, but trust me, that is incredibly high, and it's a big reason why his per carry average was a whopping 5.3 yards. That was second only to Devon Achane among all running backs that had at least 50 carries, which in my opinion is a big enough sample size to measure that kind of thing. He may only be 27th among all running backs in terms of just raw rushing yardage totals at 798, but you also have to factor in that he's 12th among running backs in receiving yards at almost 400 there as well. So in terms of total yards from scrimmage, he had about 1,200 last year, and that's as a backup running back, not a starter. For a guy who only gets 30 snaps a game behind Najee Harris, you could argue that Warren was literally the best weapon the Steelers have on offense, or at least the most efficient and most explosive. If you're wondering how a team won so many games despite looking so incredibly inept on offense overall, Jaylen Warren is why. When the offense needed a play, he was generally the one who gave it to them. I can't really imagine how bad this offense would have been without him, because oftentimes he was pretty much their only spark. Now, projecting all this ahead to this season, now that Arthur Smith is running the offense, and of course they had a great draft and completely reshaped the offensive line over the last couple years, I think the Steelers are going to lean on their backfield even more than they already were, simply because they can. They have great running backs, Warren especially, and they have a great young offensive line. That is a recipe for running the shit out of the ball. Plus, we know Arthur Smith, if he had his choice, was going to do that anyway. This means more touches for Warren, more opportunities for him to show off his explosiveness, and more chances for him to prove why I think he's one of the best running backs in the league right now, even though he just so happens to be coming off the bench for his own team. If you happen to be somebody who enjoys fantasy football, just for reference, he is RB24 in terms of his ADP on Underdog Fantasy right now, so if I had to guess, he's going to finish way above RB24 because he sure as shit ain't the 24th most talented running back. He's probably top 10, maybe top 12 at the worst. I think he's going to finish a lot higher than that just because of how damn good he is and how much I think Arthur Smith is going to feature that this year. So that's just something to keep in mind for this year. Either way, this is a tremendous player who I think just doesn't get the recognition that he would get elsewhere if he had a true opportunity to start from the beginning. He's awesome. Steelers fans know he's awesome. And I'm sure if you scroll down to the comments right now, they're telling you the same thing. Now, speaking of Arthur Smith, by the way, and this is going to be kind of a brutal transition, but trust me, we'll get there. We'll land this plane together. One of the unfortunate side effects of his run, and then run again mentality is that he doesn't feature his receivers probably as much as he should, especially when he has really, really good receivers. And he had a tremendous young receiver last year in Atlanta that, for whatever reason, he just did not feature as much as he should have. If you're a Falcons fan, you know where I'm going with this. Drake London, come on down. Drake London, in my opinion, is one of the best young receivers in the NFL who just happens to play for a team where he hasn't been that productive. It's not really his own fault, though. Again, like I said, it's more on the structure of the offense. He was 29th among all receivers in targets at just 110. That's about 70 less targets than CeeDee Lamb, for reference. And yet, even with those few targets, he still led the league in contested catches. He had 18 of those. He wasn't just a ball winner in 50-50 situations, though. He was also a great separator, too. And if you look at Matt Harmon's data that he collected on reception perception, I'll put the link down in the description below. It's a great website, and they do awesome work on receivers at both the college and pro levels. But if you look at Harmon's data, he had a 68th percentile success rate versus man coverage, and a whopping 81st percentile success rate against press coverage specifically. He also had a 77th percentile success rate against zone coverage as well. As far as his route tree goes, you would figure somebody with his size is just running go routes and slants all day, but he really ran everything. He had a ton of dig routes on his profile, a lot of corner routes, a ton of out routes. I mean, he really ran everything. He wasn't just running goes all day. As far as his alignment and role, he did all of this as a true X receiver. And if you're not familiar with an X receiver, that's the guy who's on the line of scrimmage. He's asked to fight against press corners all day long, and it's just generally seen as the hardest receiver role. And London did it every single week. This is a guy who is primed to have a huge year in 2024 if Kirk Cousins gets back to form, because he's just so damn talented. And now he has a real quarterback for the first time. Like, let's be honest, the quarterback situation the last several years in Atlanta has been kind of garbage. It's no longer garbage. In fact, I'd venture to say it's probably top 15 in the league. So ultimately, I think this could be a big year for Drake London and easily put him in line for a monster extension from the Falcons sooner rather than later. And to me, that would likely be a wise move for them to do so, because receivers that are this good are typically worth every single penny. While we're on the topic of smart spending, by the way, I do want to take a moment to talk about my own smarter spending recently, which was made possible by Rocket Money. If you know me well, which some of you watching this do, I routinely fall prey to signing up for free trials and subscriptions and then never using them again, only to have them repeatedly drain my bank account month after month after month. And Rocket Money has helped me to clean that up and monitor my spending a lot more closely. In particular, I truly had no memory that I signed up for EA Play at some point. I don't know why, and I don't know what game I wanted to access when I signed up for it, but clearly it wasn't that important, or the game wasn't that good, because I forgot all about it. But Rocket Money identified that as a recurring expense for me on my account, which was a great way to remind me to cancel it, because I clearly never use it. You can also use Rocket Money to lower your bills just by sending a picture of the bill to the app and tapping a few buttons, and you can use it to create custom budgets as well to fit your lifestyle and improve your spending habits. There has already been over $500 million of canceled unwanted subscriptions through Rocket Money, so if you want to join the other 5 million people that use it to save more and spend less, go to rocketmoney.com/Brett or click the link in the description to get started for free. You can also unlock even more features with premium, but again, that is rocketmoney.com/Brett to get started for free. Thank you once again to Rocket Money for sponsoring today's show, and with that, let's get back to it. In a truly stunning turn of events, Tyler Linderbaum, one of the highest rated center prospects in recent years, ended up being a damn good center in the league. Shocker, I know. Look, I know that 2022 was a little bit up and down for Linderbaum, but if you just watch 2023, he was easily one of the 5 best centers in the game. On average, he gave up less than 1 pressure per week, and technically he only gave up 1 sack, though it's debatable on if the sack that he was credited with was actually his fault, but whatever, I'll just go with it. He technically gave up a sack. Either way, he was rock solid in pass protection, and he also has great feet and balance as a run blocker too. The thing I like most about his game is that even if he doesn't win on the initial pop against a DT early in the block, he has the feet to get himself back into a favorable position later in the block, especially on outside zone calls, which is a style of run that takes longer for the running back to hit it, so there's a little bit longer for the block to develop. And Linderbaum is great on those styles of runs because he just doesn't give up. He has balance through contact to get himself into better leverage positions as the play develops, so he can fight back and win on the 4th or 5th step rather than just the first one. If he starts out too high and loses early, he can adjust and win late. And that's kind of the champion wrestler in him, you know? And for those of you who don't know, he literally was a champion wrestler. He's the only person to ever pin Tristan Wirfs, who just got paid a massive amount of money this week. But going back to Linderbaum, you can see his wrestling background in his play style. It's about having the ability to recover if someone gets the drop on you, and he actually can recover and win where most centers would just lose faster. He's also a tremendous blocker in space too. Baltimore loves to pull him because he's just so nimble and balanced that he can pick off linebackers with ease. And when it comes to gap scheme runs, he's got great power as well. So just as far as all-around great centers go, there are very few that I would have ahead of Linderbaum, especially now that Jason Kelce's retired. That list just got even shorter. He is easily one of the best in the NFL, well worth the first-round pick that Baltimore spent on him. And I know that last season was his first Pro Bowl appearance, but it definitely will not be his last. Now, number 1 on this list is someone who has still yet to make his first Pro Bowl, shockingly enough, even though he is equally elite in my opinion. And yet, despite his lack of media recognition, I would bet anything that after this year, he is going to be one of the highest paid guards, if not the highest paid guard in the entire league. And yes, trust me, he is absolutely worth that money. Because of how pass-happy the Kansas City offense is, only 4 guards in the NFL had more pass-blocking snaps last year than Trey Smith. And yet, despite all of those snaps, he still only gave up 2 sacks and just 7 quarterback hits the entire year. He is one of the very best pass-blocking guards in the entire NFL. He is solid as a rock. And I think it's fair to say that if he were not on this Chiefs team, they probably would not be in contention to win their 3rd straight Super Bowl. That is how important he is to this offense. Yes, I acknowledge that now that Jason Kelce's retired, they do have the best center in the NFL right next to him in Creed Humphrey, and Joe Thuney on the other side is also an elite guard in his own right. But just because there are 2 other amazing players on this interior trio does not mean that Trey Smith doesn't deserve his own recognition. The Chiefs just so happen to have 3 elite players playing right next to each other. Only one of them is not getting credit for it. I mentioned how good he is as a pass protector, but I also want to bring up his run blocking too. He's got exceptional power to uproot defensive tackles off the line of scrimmage and get that vertical displacement that you look for on these inside zone runs that KC relies on so much. Not that they run the ball a whole lot, but whenever they do run the ball, inside zone is their predominant concept. And that concept really only works if you have an interior trio that just beats the shit out of people on the line of scrimmage, which these guys do. And then on pin and pull schemes and outside zone schemes, which are kind of their change-ups in this offense, you can see just how nimble he is with his first two steps, and he can do some crazy fast overtakes when he's working with Creed. And to be honest, I almost wish he went somewhere other than KC that runs the ball more, just so that we could see him do this more often, because, I mean, my God, he is gifted on these kinds of blocks. There was one he had against the Raiders last year, and this was on a Pacheco touchdown from a Wildcat look. They were working on a zero nose who did his best to try to get skinny and work to Smith's frontside shoulder before he could finish the overtake. And keep in mind, this is a really hard block for any guard to do because you got to go a long way to get to the front side of that nose tackle. And Creed was providing little to no help on it because he had to get out of there ASAP to get on that linebacker. So Smith was kind of all on his own here, but to make things easier on himself, Trey used his hands to help his feet. He grabbed the back of the nose tackle's jersey as he was dipping his shoulder, and he kind of yanked down to force him to stumble even further off balance. And then during that stumble, he just kind of hinged around that nose tackle to position himself on the front side and seal him out of the play. It was a brilliant little adjustment, and this is exactly why I love watching Trey Smith play. He has all these little technical nuances and tricks of the trade, and he just does stuff that most guards don't do. And I don't mean that he has bad technique. I just think that he has unique technique. He has like a practical technique that just makes sense. I was recently down in Dallas peppering both him and Creed Humphrey with questions because they were both presenting at O-Line Masterminds, which, side note, if you're not familiar with OLM, it is the premier offensive line event of the year. It's run by Duke Manyweather over at the Cowboys facility. Trey Smith was there, Creed Humphrey was there, Steve Hutchinson, Teron Armstead. I mean, you name it, there was just offensive line legends all over the place. And they're there to teach other NFL players as well as young college players these tricks of the trade. Duke Manyweather was gracious enough to let me sit in there and also kind of pepper these guys with questions. And just listening to Trey Smith talk for a couple of days about offensive line play and all the little things he does, not just in terms of preparation, but also in terms of technique, communication. I mean, he just blew my mind. Like, I learned more about offensive line play in 2 days listening to Trey talk than I have in 10 years studying this sport. He is a brilliant, brilliant human being, and he happens to be a freak of nature. I just can't say enough good things about him, and whoever happens to pay him at the top of the market, because I don't know if Kansas City is going to be able to afford it, but whoever happens to pay him, they are getting a stud and a true franchise cornerstone. Trey Smith, all-pro guard. I'm starting the campaign right now. He deserves it. I hope you guys enjoyed today's show, and I encourage you once again to sound off in the comments below. Give me all of your favorite underrated offensive players. Doesn't have to be quarterbacks, but if you have a quarterback you want to throw in there, that's cool with me. Either way, I could only talk about 5 guys today, but there are dozens more that were worthy of this list. So give me all of yours, and I will see you guys very soon.